One of the coolest things I've done here in Texas, by far, is going to BBQ School. I had a blast at Bar-A-BBQ School learning some tricks on how to smoke a brisket.
Open this up by cutting along that decal fat. That's something we're going to take off anyways. I'm not cutting into anything that I don't want to cut into. That's going to be my first cut. Just removing a good chunk of that to kind of flatten this brisket out a little bit more. While I'm doing that, I'm going to remove some of this gray meat that's already cooked. Just one of the briskets removed from the carcass. It's treated right there, so if I leave that on, that stuff just kind of dries out, flakes off. So I'm going to kind of come in, my knife right here. I'm not going to cut into any of this meat right here. I'm just going to take this fat and that gray meat off. While I do that, I expose some good marbling, some good meat right there. Made sure to leave this fat band right there on. Don't want to take any of that off because I want this to protect that meat right there. So that's what I'm looking for. Brisket sitting pretty flat. But if I were to leave this on, it's going to be kind of pumped up like that. You know, this is a lot of dense fat right here. It's hard to render all of that. This is really good for sausage. So by doing that, I eliminated that air pocket where it would essentially overcook all that meat and have all this excess fat that's not going to render. The next cut is kind of removing this mohawk, which there's not much of one on this particular brisket. Sometimes this part is a lot higher, a lot more flappier, but I want to shave this down a bit to remove a lot of that hard dense fat right there and kind of get a smoother surface on the top of the brisket. So I'm kind of finding where it feathers out right here with my fingers, and I want to take that bit off right there. Now when I start to get about right here is when I start curving my knife towards the back end of this brisket a little bit more, and I kind of start cutting into this back end right here. And I'm pulling it down and I'm trying to kind of come across and round it off. That way I'm starting to develop this round edge back here of the brisket. That way it's not real boxy or squared off. You know, rounder surfaces means it's just going to handle heat a lot better on that pig. So I think I got about where I want with that mohawk. You see now it's a little flatter here, which makes it easier to kind of trim off excess fat. Now that I have it dialed in here, I can kind of look at the rest of this brisket and see what areas need more trimming. But before I do that, I'm just going to finish kind of rounding this part of the brisket off. Take off a little bit more of that fat from that mohawk. This part pretty smooth. Now I want to just kind of finish rounding off this fat cap a little bit more. On this side, I want to make sure to leave all that fat on there to protect the meat. I don't want to expose any meat right there. So I'm being very careful not to take off too much. What I'm looking for here is a nice smooth round surface, you know, for good aerodynamics, but leaving just the right amount of fat to protect that meat so it doesn't crisp up. So looking for something about like that. Start to see some meat right there, so I know that there's not too much excess fat on there. I feel like what's on there is going to easily render. So now I'm just going to kind of work in this section right here, get my fat even on top, kind of in this midsection and along this side right here. to do just kind of nice, long, even strokes. That way I get a real smooth fat cap. I don't want anything looking like I went at it with a hacksaw. Just want it to be nice and round. I'm checking to see how much I'm working with right there. That's a little thicker than what I want. So now I can go in a little more aggressive than what I have been. Look now, it's looking a little thinner, especially right there. We got a little, maybe too thin, but that's going to be a lot easier to render than what it was before. It's about what we're looking for. We really want to leave that fat cap on the side right there to protect those burnt ends that are coming from that point muscle. We're going to start to see some meat right here that's exposed on that lean muscle. I'm actually going to go in and take a good amount of that off to remove that gray meat right there. So that's going to be my next cut. It's kind of expose some good meat, get rid of that gray meat, and also get this a little more even, just it kind of flaps out about right there. So I want to get it to where it's nice and straight. So that's what we're looking for, nice and symmetrical. Now we're able to really see kind of how much fat we're really working with on top, because now we can see that that meat's exposed. I feel like I can take a little more off here, kind of blend it in with everywhere else that I've already kind of trimmed it off at. So I think we're pretty much done here on this side. So I'm going to come back to this side, kind of get this a little more symmetrical. Kind of have this real weird, like flappy fat right there, kind of just hanging out over this meat. So I'm going to kind of take that off. Now we don't have any fat that's kind of going to flake off. We got a more symmetrical end with that's parallel with this side. So now we're going to work on just rounding off this front end. Right here, it's real thin. A lot of this, you know, just kind of fans out to just being fat right there. So we're going to go pretty aggressive and curve this section to blend it in over here. And I like to do it kind of cut by cut, because I want to take off what I need to, but I don't want to take off any more than that. So if I'm able to do it in a few cuts and kind of maximize what I'm able to leave on, I prefer it that way. It's still pretty thin right there. So, you know, that tells me I need to be a little more aggressive, probably go inward a little bit more. Kind of just feeling right here. Doesn't feel like it's going to get really any thicker than that at that part. Ideally would like this to be thicker, but this brisket just doesn't have it in it, so we're just going to have to make it work. I'm going to kind of do the same thing, just not quite as aggressive over here. I just want to round this edge off a bit. Clean this fat on that corner off a little bit more. Good amount of excess right there. Kind of blend it in with that round shape a little more. Take off a little more fat right here. have it. Kind of what we're looking for. A nice round, smooth surface on the edge of the brisket and the top. Nice even fat cap. Even on about a 1/4 inch. Just enough to protect the meat. Just enough to be enough to render, not too much fat. Kind of going in with that aggressive curve side on that lean part of the brisket. So it's going to last a bit longer on the smoker. I think this one's done.
So we always go pepper first, but we go a nice even layer, and we always season meat side first because our presentation side is going to be the top on the fat cap. If you were cooking fat side down, which you absolutely can, applying the same principles, you would just go fat side up, season that product first. But when you're seasoning, guys, just make sure it's a nice, even coat. You're moving at a consistent pace all the way across. If you get going, maybe you go a little heavy here and a little light here, don't stop and go back. Just finish it with that pass and then come back a little bit closer and just kind of fill those areas in if you need to. But stay high. The higher you are, the more even the spray pattern you're going to get.
So you're getting the ends, the tin foil.
Yeah, so I'm really just protecting those outer edges. You know, where a lot of heat is being put on. So this side that kind of starts to curl up, that's that real thin side of the brisket. So I'm kind of going in and tucking it underneath. So it's really protecting that brisket that's kind of raised off the grates just from it curling up, and then protecting that side. And then on the back end too, you know, with just being so much heat moving and hitting that part, we're protecting that as well. So with the rest of these, I'm going to face them the opposite direction to the fire. The reason for that is this lean side of the brisket, you know, there's a lot less fat there. So it takes longer for that side to get tender. So we're gonna finish these briskets off with that part facing the heat source. So hopefully you'll kind of catch them up and have them cook more congruently. That way we don't overcook this muscle trying to get this one done.
You'd mentioned the cold smoke last night. So what's that process like? What temperature and what time did you start at, and all that kind of important information?
So we'll start that at around 7 o'clock and run a fire that burns between 150 degrees to 200 degrees for about 8 hours.
Okay. And you just leave it overnight at that once you get to that temperature?
Yeah, we'll just have a nice tight bundle fire, so the logs are pretty close together and the airflow is pretty shut down, so it just burns real slow over a long period of time. But this is going to be overcooked. This is going to be slightly overcooked. So we put that tallow in the bottom of the foil. It's going to kind of help confit the bottom of the brisket. It's going to soften it up over time without overdoing everything else. We'll work really hard to cook, you know, just right. And, you know, it's going to stay there overnight. And then when we open this thing up in the morning and go to slice it and cut it for service, we're able to dump that tallow on the top of the brisket to kind of balance out that seasoning, that bark a little bit more. Where if we were to pour it on top now, it's going to absorb there a little bit more and get softer and mushier than what we want it to. And, you know, none of that's really going to collect there in the bottom. So that's why we're putting there in the bottom. That's why we're double wrapping it, to really make sure that that doesn't leak out as much as we can possibly keep it in there from leaking out.
Wild.
Dude, these look beautiful.